Welcome to Waypoints, the podcast of fly fishing travel. With helpful travel tips, news and events, destination profiles, great stories, and expert advice from seasoned and experienced traveling anglers, this is your backstage pass to the world of fishing travel. Waypoints is fueled by adventure and brought to you by Yellow Dog Fly Fishing, a hands-on specialty travel and booking company that delivers the industry's very best insider knowledge, logistical support, and trip preparation. Freshwater or saltwater, international or domestic, Yellow Dog has you covered. And now your host, Yellow Dog founder and director, Jim Klug.
I'm joined today by Charlie Kahn, longtime fishing guide, former fly shop owner, seasonal lodge manager, and the founder and current executive director of the Taimen Fund, an organization dedicated to the conservation of wild taimen in Mongolia. Through a variety of innovative conservation approaches and community partnerships in rural Mongolia, the Taimen Fund is working hard to maintain the ecological integrity of the watersheds upon which Mongolian taimen depend. Another great example of anglers stepping up and making a difference for a species in an area that otherwise might not get a lot of attention. Thanks for sitting down with me today, Charlie, and welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot, Jim. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate you being here. This is great. We've been dying to do a taimen episode for a long time. We've had a lot of people waiting for this one, and who better to sit down with us and talk about Mongolia and chasing these amazing fish. So thanks for that.
Thank you. Absolutely.
So Charlie, you've worked in the fly fishing industry for years and you've worn a lot of hats. Tell us how you first found your way to fly fishing and why you decided to make a career out of fishing.
Well, I grew up in Rochester, Minnesota, southeast Minnesota. And I've been fly fishing, the spring creeks in that area since I was old enough to do so, 11 years old. And was interested in fly fishing, obviously read the magazines and read about Montana and always wanted to be out here. So it was kind of a goal of mine to get here.
So you've been doing it since you were a young age?
I've been fly fishing a long time, yeah.
Well, and you've guided a lot of places over those years, but you started guiding in Mongolia back in 1998, and you've been a taimen guide now for 22 years.
I guess.
There's not a lot of people who could say that.
Yeah, I don't feel like I'm old enough to have done it 22 years, but
sorry to remind you of that fact.
Apparently so, yeah.
Well, how did you first find your way to fishing in Mongolia? How did you first kind of get there?
I met Jeff Vermillion in the Murray Bar. I've actually gotten quite a few guide jobs out of that place.
The Livingston Institution.
Yeah. And that was probably a year or two before he started operating there, and just kind of knew him and like basically threw my name in the hat. And it might have been a year or two later when I heard from him, and they were putting a team together, and that's sort of how that got started. So in 98, I went for my first season over there.
And you've been there ever since?
Pretty much, yeah. In a variety of capacities, yeah.
Well, let me ask you a question, because I know there's a lot of people listening that don't know much about taimen. They may have seen the photos, read a couple magazine articles, but why would anyone fly halfway across the world to fish for taimen? What is it about these fish, Charlie, that makes the experience worthwhile and so unique, in your opinion?
Half of it's probably the setting, Jim. To fish those rivers in Mongolia in that environment is a big part of it. And, the marquee value of the fish itself, it's the largest trout in the world. And so you're going to catch, fish that are probably, in a lot of cases, averaging 30 inches. And the opportunity to get one over 40 inches is awesome. So you'll come home with kind of a trophy picture of a amazing fish in an amazing environment.
Well, you mentioned the surroundings over there. And the times I've been, it feels in so many ways like parts of central or eastern Montana. There's this sense of the familiar about it, just these wide open places and these incredible landscapes.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, my impression of it when I first landed in UB, Ulaanbaatar, the capital city, which has changed a great deal over that time period, or since then rather. And, I kind of felt you're out in the middle of nowhere, then you take another flight out to Marone, and you're landing in the middle of nowhere. I felt in a lot of ways like I was on, doing time travel instead of just, going somewhere else. It was very cool, and no fences and herders on horses, and, it was actually a lot to take in. It was amazing.
A little bit of an assault on the senses.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. And it was, just being on the ground floor of it was unbelievable. But I think particularly, well, we've seen Montana change so much, but it just, there wasn't any riprap. The only fences that were there were the ones we built. I hate to say, I mean, it was too much. It was cool.
And it's a place that really hasn't changed much, which is getting harder to find places in the world that you can say that about.
I would say in large part that's true. Certainly the capital city has grown a lot and developed a lot. Their economy, we've seen that go up and down, since I've been going there. And one thing I've noticed on the rivers that I've spent a lot of time on is I think the number of herders are down. I mean, the kids aren't taking over the family business, so to speak. And, so the populations along the river are a little bit different.
A lot of people are moving to the city, like you said. I mean, UB, which is the capital of Mongolia, it's gotten massive, but that's in large part because so many people that have been a part of this kind of nomadic lifestyle for generations, hundreds and hundreds of years, thousands of years, have now moved to the city. So actually the rural areas have gotten even more Spartan. Yeah, that's not a lot of places you can say that.
It's different, Yeah, I mean, it really is. And a lot of it's, you look at Montana and our cute little towns, which are very livable, but a little village in Mongolia is not that livable. I mean, from our standards,
it's pretty rugged.
You don't have, even to build a house and get all the proper infrastructure that we live comfortably in, it's really not practical to do that even.
Well, let's talk a little bit about some of the specific characteristics of taimen. So they're the world's largest freshwater salmonids with a historic range that included Central Asia, Mongolia, China, Siberia, the Russian Far East, Japan, and even at one point on the Korean Peninsula, correct?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, and records suggest that at one time, literally like 6.5 foot, 200-pound taimen prowled a lot of these rivers. Mm-hmm. I mean, monstrous fish, like Jeremy Wade river monster kind of stuff.
Yep.
And these taimen, they're very slow-growing fish, as I understand it. They live a long time, sometimes I guess up to like 40 years.
Yes. Yep.
Yet also incredibly fragile.
Very. Yeah. I mean, in typical kind of indicator species, I mean, the canary in the coal mine in large part, you have these rivers that are, as an apex predator, it's not densely populated with taimen, even though there could be fish everywhere in that system.
Well, and they are the apex predator in these systems. Really, they have no threats other than ecological and environmental issues, of course, and man poaching.
Yeah.
But other than that, they are just the king of their domain over there.
Yeah, they really are. They are, and the hard thing with our awareness of how the globe is changing. For me, I don't put a lot, and I know. Dr. Olaf Jensen from Rutgers has studied global warming and effects on taimen, and there's some work out there being done. But quite honestly, like emotionally, I haven't really tackled that yet because we're kind of so solely focused on what we do with our conservation work.
Well, you were talking about the numbers of fish, and there can be certain rivers or certain stretches where the density of taimen is high, but for the most part, and I read this a lot on your website, Charlie, from the Taimen Fund. It talked about even the healthiest Mongolian rivers, they may contain no more than plus or minus 20 big adult taimen per kilometer.
Per kilometer, correct.
So they're pretty spread out, and they definitely have a territory that they kind of own. And again, that apex predator is pretty amazing.
Yeah, they do. They're interesting fish. So I've been involved with studies done. Zeb Hogan and Sudeep Chandra at University of Nevada, Reno, in conjunction with the Fisheries Department and in Madison. This has probably been 12 years ago, but they did radio tagging and acoustic tags. So there were 40 different tags out there, and they got a real good feel for how they range, and it's very interesting. I think it's not really unlike some of the brown trout studies. So you have like Walter, who never leaves his pool. And then you have a fish who might go from a confluence pool, upriver 20K, back to the confluence pool and do that over a series of years. And then you have the one that just goes whoop and
Never comes back.
moves 70K or never comes back or does, so it's kind of like a third and a third and a third in terms of the movement.
So let's say, for argument's sake, you might have 24 big taimen in a productive, healthy kilometer of water.
Right.
Why are they there? What are they eating?
Lennox grayling, mainly, ducks.
Anything they can
critters,
fit in their big mouths. Ground squirrels,
whatever,
anything.
Yeah, I was kind of, when we were talking about getting together, I had, years ago, I was fishing a confluence pool and there was a dead cow on the side, halfway in and out of the river. And I just kind of watched it there, and the birds would come in and this and that. Over time, I was kind of just, I'd see it when I go by or smell it or whatever. And one day we're fishing down the pool and we land Eizo Marahashi, Tokyo's master big fish guy, won the Holly like 5 years in a row. And so I'm guiding Eizo and he lands this monster. It was a 52-inch fish with like guts coming out of its mouth.
That had been chowing on the cow.
It had to have been. It had to have been.
And those big, like those 50-inch plus taimen are just a whole
different thing.
Different creature.
Yeah.
I'll never forget my first trip over there. I was waiting down a run and I got to a point and I was kind of looking around. I thought this is productive and I wanted to come back to it. So I looked out in front of me and I saw this submerged log. It must have been about 5 feet long, big dark log right in front of me. I said, okay, I just got to walk back till I see this log. And as I'm looking at it, all of a sudden it drifts out and starts swimming upriver.
Yep.
And I thought, oh my God, that is the largest river fish I've ever seen in my life.
Yep. Sometimes they move.
Well, it's definitely special. And I didn't really appreciate it till I got over there because I always had that mindset, Charlie, where I was like, okay, I get it. The fish are big, whatever, you go do it once, but it's not like that at all. It is spectacular.
But 100%, it's, every fish has its thing. It's not it doesn't touch salt in this case, in the Mongolia case, they're not going to rip you, but they're going to get in the air. They're going to blow up on a skated fly. They have their own thing, and it's actually on some of the rivers, which are heavier, meaner, more burly rivers. It's kind of not a bad thing that they don't or you'd never land one.
You'd have no chance.
Yeah.
Well, talk to me a little bit about kind of the overall Mongolian experience. We talked a little bit about the landscape. Obviously, the fish are big, but for those that are listening that have no idea what Mongolia is all about, how would you describe kind of the overall experience, the setting, the landscape, what it looks like when you're fishing on the rivers over there? What in your mind is kind of the Mongolian experience?
Ooh. Oh, that's a big question.
That's a big place.
Yeah, it's a big place. I kind of touched on a little bit with like the sense of time travel, watching people herd. That's their everyday job. They're moving hundreds of sheep and goats and cattle and horses, and they're active along the river. It is interesting because I've been able to fish areas that are grazed and not grazed. And when you get into certain areas or you fish in parks, if you're able to, it's a very different experience just because sort of like the whole, what they've done with the water up like Slough Creek and Lamar that have kind of regrown a little bit. There's definitely, you can see that the grazing has a effect on the riparian area along the water's edge. But it's definitely, it's a very soft feel. With it all being kind of grazed, you have like this consistent like 4 inches of grass that go all the way up to the rocks on the mountains, and then it's dotted with larch trees. The falls are spectacular.
The color,
the birch, the aspen, and then the larch change. And there's also oftentimes mixed in with the larch, there's evergreens, so that it maintains the green and maybe a little snow. It's epic soft beauty. It's not your dramatic, although some areas of Mongolia are like this, but it's not your dramatic like Teton kind of feel, or even Paradise Valley for that matter. It's kind of like your sort of soft flowing, like out of Cascade on the Missouri River, for example, where it just kind of reaches all the way out up into the forest and then up into the rocks, into the mountains.
Just goes forever.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing. Well, when you talk about the fishing over there, and I know this is a tough question, but if you had to compare it to something else, would you say, fishing for taimen is similar to fishing for what? Would you say steelhead? What would you kind of compare it to?
Well, for sure, in that there's a lot of things that about time. Well, first of all, I've done taimen fishing more than I've done, say, Atlantic salmon fishing or steelheading, but it's more active. So in other words, if you're swinging flies for steelhead, it's just that's what you're doing. So with taimen fishing, your presentation would be more active. You're going to move the fly more. You're going to make it look, yummy. You're going to move it along, give it a wake, do certain things to it to entice the fish. The whole, I could probably I could spend the whole time talking about skating a fly for taimen. There's a lot to that. And, the speed, the pace, like certain flies. So for example, if you straight skate, and I'll keep this somewhat short, but if you just straight skate, you can get a taimen to come up to it, but it probably won't eat it. If you can get a little downriver belly in it and get it kind of moving and swimming downriver and kind of a little faster than it might normally, when it kind of makes that little hook, they'll nail it. They'll eat it. So there's certain things that I've learned that you do to make that fish commit better to your hook, because they're not easy to land. They're not easy to convert. You can get them up, but to get them from there to the net to get a little DNA sample doesn't happen every strike. Maybe not every 4 or 5 even. So.
Well, talk to us a little bit about the eat, because especially when you're skating topwater over there, how would you describe the eat of a 40-inch plus taimen coming after that fly?
Well, it's spectacular. I don't know if you've seen any of the footage that RA have gotten, but yeah, I mean, it's head over heels. It's, they do cartwheels on their nose.
And it can be scary. I mean, because you might be skating and you get a little bit kind of in the groove and somewhat calm and transfixed, and all of a sudden,
I've seen people get knocked over by strikes just because, they lull you too. No fish eats when you're ready.
That's right.
Right. And, there's some guy like, it's classic. Oh, it's getting warm, nice fall day. Oh, I'm going to take my fleece off. And I'm like, dude, no, not now.
You're right in the bucket.
No,
don't move.
Boom, they're on the gas cans, laying in the boat. I mean, it's just, it's startling. True. That is true.
Violent.
It is. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this. So 12 years guiding in Mongolia. Okay. It's 2010. You've been 12 seasons over there. You've been there a while. You end up getting involved more in the conservation game, kind of the big picture stuff. And you're part of the group that creates the Taimen Fund.
Right.
And you became and remain today the first executive director of the Taimen Fund.
Of the Taimen Fund. So the Taimen Fund in 2004, world banker Jeff Liebert, who has a great history there. So he was a Peace Corps. 92, 93 in Mongolia and Maroon, and ended up staying in UB and running a cashmere factory, and this led to that and this and that. And he was maybe one of the first guys catching taimen, but he was able to package this program together for a conservation project in the Egg watershed, which included the creation of the Taimen Conservation Fund Mongolia, who Yellow Dogs worked with, and the Tributary Fund in Montana, run by Betsy Gaines Quammen. So I was involved with the science work as a guide and and certain things. And Betsy and I just got to talking about, I think there's a couple simple things we could do to really curb poaching, which we saw more of over time. And, so I started working with the Tributary Fund here, and we created the Riverkeeper program.
And you guys put together an impressive amount of money in those early years.
Well, the World Bank helped, but just our little program, the cool thing about conservation work in Mongolia, and we've talked a lot about this, Jim, but a little bit truly goes a long ways. And, just the basic idea of coordinating herders with law enforcement to keep illegal, I would say that I'd like to say illegal fishing, poaching makes you picture nets and things like that, which does occur, but that wasn't the primary problem. I think illegal fishing, treble hook, not releasing fish, things of that nature was probably the biggest problem we saw then.
And you guys figured that out, that this was a threat to the survival of these big time. And because again, they're not, every kilometer by the hundreds, right? So there's not a lot of them over there. So poaching, illegal fishing, however, whatever type of extractive fishing you want to label it, was somewhat of an issue, still is an issue on some rivers. But what we've seen over the years since you've been there is that a lot of these rivers have become more accessible from UB due to road improvements. So tell us about some more of the river keeper efforts you guys have in place to kind of protect these fish and what you've put in place.
Well, one thing, I just want to back up on a point. When I started guiding there in 98, if you got the upriver beat, you're like, okay. And the years, and this is all stuff I've learned, but years and years before that, there was a Czech and Russian operator fishing the upper river, and it was hammered. We didn't know. And even pre-River Keeper, we saw that improve just because of the fishing presence. And so that was kind of a thing that sort of like triggered the model, so to speak. And quite simply, conversations I had with Puji, who runs the Time and Conservation Fund Mongolia, owner of Hubschool Travel, who has an operation concession in that area. And I mean, he's just like, yeah, that's it. Eyes on the water. And quite simply, that's what we did. And Betsy put the program together, and Susan Higgins. And I went out and got on the phone and raised money and got the project started.
And it's been going ever since.
It's been going ever since.
Well, that's pretty cool. And the illegal fishing, extraction, poaching, whatever you want to call it, that's a threat. But you're dealing with kind of big picture habitat loss over there due to mining and overgrazing that you talked about a little bit, more development activities, continued unsustainable recreational fishing practices on certain rivers. I mean, there's a lot of threats out there for sure.
Yeah, there are for sure. And, I think one of the things that with the presence of operations and commercial catch and release operations, fly fishing, there's so much, like the word's out, oh, this is protected. So the areas in some ways, even for legal anglers, gets more attention. And so that's been abundantly clear over the last few years. And so starting next year, we're going to identify what we call river keeper recovery zones. So we're going to have shoulder areas adjacent to strongholds to kind of widen our presence.
A little more of a buffer zone.
Yes. Yeah. Create buffer zones to, I think I don't want to skip around too much, but, utilize some of those people interested in, expanding conservation, catch and release. And it doesn't have to be a $7,000 trip with Americans with helicopters landing. There's other ways that we hope to identify to be able to do that. That's beneficial to the fisheries and the communities.
And this is another example of a continuing success story, because I know it's a work in progress and there's a lot of stuff that still needs to happen over there. But, another example of a success story where anglers get involved and protect these resources that matter to fly fishermen, to sport fishermen. So often, though, that's kind of your first line of activism and also defense and keeping an eye on these places.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's pretty neat. But, I know that obviously there's continued threats. They're talking about potential population decreases. Again, a lot of the rivers that are really accessible by roads or closer to the city now. But the good news is that you guys are continuing to find these stable populations in the more remote areas. And of course, harder to get to, harder to access. But, these populations tend to be much more untouched and much healthier. And you and I have had conversations about, kind of some of these new places you're still finding and still exploring over there.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And that's sort of for us as fly anglers and destination guys, that's a natural. But there's a river, for example, that's about 6 hours drive from UB, that the river itself, just the way it's sort of more of a marshy, willowy kind of river, not as easy to overgraze, not as easy to poach. Again, accessible to the city. That's the kind of area we want to create a recovery zone, and maybe work with some of the UB fly clubs to adopt that and create some kind of like domestic angling model where they go out there and they fish with a local guide, and, it's reasonably priced, but it helps with protecting a different river and create a model.
Well, and that actually brings up my next question, because you talked about the UB fly clubs. I mean, is this a thing over in Mongolia? Is there a sport fishing culture and a fly fishing community that's established and growing over in Mongolia that's
Huge.
That's indigenous?
Huge. I had the coolest experience. It's 2 summers ago. I went over to, as we were starting to collect DNA samples out of one of the other watersheds in northern Mongolia. I went over to join the Fly Shop Mongolia outfitting team, and it was myself and 2 donors, and we're going, and we get to the airport to fly out, and there's 3 Mongolian dudes that were, paying sport anglers going on this trip, fly guys, paying the price. Actually, I walked up to this guy and I said hello, and he went to school at Fort Collins. He's Mongolian. He's an import-export guy.
Lives in UB.
Just thinks about fly fishing all day like we do. And, so yeah, that's totally growing. So we're getting interest in fly fishing, and you're getting some guys that kind of can take a trip, in a domestic capacity. And so, we have to figure out how to take advantage of all of that.
Well, that's pretty cool that grassroots element is alive and growing.
Yep.
Over in the country. That's awesome. You don't see
and
that in a lot of places.
And that was interesting because, Byra Sakhan, Big Fish Byra, first fishing guide, I think he started in 98. He has been a huge leader. He'll teach anyone how to fly fish. And he was associated with the Hovsgol Travel Company. And then the Hovsgol Travel Company also helped kind of outfit the former Prime Minister Byer. And Byer came out one year, and we're fishing the Yellowstone. And we're talking. I'm like, hey, we need like a TU kind of thing. This, what are we going to do? And, he's like, okay, I'm on it. And so Byra started the Mongolia Fly Fishing Association. And he has grown the sport. I got to town one day in the spring, and that morning he put a Facebook deal out on the Mongolia Fly Fishing Association that we're going to do a nymphing clinic on the Tula River in UB. 30 people show up.
Nice.
So that's the stuff that's really, that's kind of free conservation, to tell you the truth.
And exciting.
And totally exciting.
Yeah. There's so many developing, and I won't say countries, I'll say developing fisheries and fishing cultures out there that lack that. And the fact that exists in Mongolia is pretty amazing, and certainly bodes well for the future. Well, I want to switch gears a little bit, Charlie.
Sure.
And let's say an angler is going to head to Mongolia for the very first time. They're totally new to taimen fishing. They've never done it before. Let's talk a little bit about gear and equipment and flies and some recommendations for somebody that might be interested in heading over there. Sure. So first question, what rods am I bringing with me if I'm heading to Mongolia?
Well, you gotta do a little research on what river you're on. I kind of like a 2-hand, 81-20, 12 foot, 12.5 foot 8 weight. It depends on certain rivers. I'm a 91-40 guy. So that sort of depends on your destination. Are you drift fishing? Are you wade fishing? There's 4 different major programs over there. A lot are kind of static based, whether you're anchor dropped or wading. Some are drift based, so you're just drifting and stripping like you would on the Yellowstone. So that comes into play for sure. So if you're going to be on your feet a lot on some of the bigger rivers, I like a 14 for 9.
Right. Two-handed rod.
Two-handed rod.
There's definitely a good two-handed scene over there.
There's a great two-handed scene over there. The trick, the balance is, I definitely overweight my lines because I do like to fish a big skater, so to be able to practically be able to like spay cast it, takes a little dialing in, but, I definitely practice.
Yeah, that's a constant theme on this show. We talk a lot about practice, no matter your
But,
fishery.
there's ways of doing it. And there's little cheater overhead stuff you can do. 8 or 9 weights.
Well, that was my next question.
Speaking.
So you get guys that aren't two-handed guys. Like, so therefore I can't fish Mongolia. Not the case at all.
Not the case
you go
at
over
all,
with,
no.
a 9 foot 9 weight,
Yeah.
semi-fast action
Yeah.
rod, and you're going to be able to cover a lot of water just fine.
Absolutely.
All right. What about fly lines over there? I mean, obviously, when you're skating, you've got your floating lines, but tips, sink tips. What do you think?
I carry, with my overweighted, 600 on a 14.9 or something of that nature, I'll carry a variety of lengths of like T14.
Okay.
I'll carry 5-foot sections or 10-foot sections, and kind of depending on what I want to do. If I want to dredge, I'll have that option.
And you're changing it up a lot depending on, what fishery you're on, where in the fishery.
Well, I skate.
you just skate.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. No, but we do. It depends on what you're doing. And again, like with the switch, they can't see me doing quote switch. I'll tell you what, there's something pretty deadly with an 8-weight switch rod and a 300 regular good old fashioned 300 line. Load it, pick it up, throw it.
Cover a lot of water. Well, there we go. Well, so a little bit about rods and lines there. Obviously, you don't know what the weather is going to do. You might be fishing in a t-shirt. You might be fishing in snow, depending on where you are. So great waders, good rain gear, lots of layers. Mm-hmm. I tell people, think about going to Montana in the fall.
Yeah, for sure. But, there are summer programs there. MRO runs in July and August, and I'm sure those guys never touch waders. Their expedition.
Yeah, the upper canyon stuff and the expedition. Yeah,
they do that. I'm sure they're wet wading the whole time. But yeah, so for your more traditional, typical Egg River, Shishkid, those rivers, yeah, you're dressing for fall.
How about wading boots? What do you like for footwear over there in most of those rivers?
I'm kind of like, I'm a felt guy. I'm a felt till they take them off my cold dead feet. I hate to say it.
It makes a difference.
It just does. I don't care what anyone says. And, it just...
Disinfect them and bring them with you. Right?
Disinfect them, bring them with you.
It makes a difference.
It makes a difference.
Yeah.
Bring some studs if you need to. But, man, I've gone skidding across boats and studs, like, you forget you're wearing them. I guess I wear what I'm used to. I don't know. I'm just, that's my call on that. So there's currently not a ban there. Maybe there should be, as like the conservation guy sitting here saying, bring felt. I don't know what that message says, but
well,
I deal with that all the time too. I mean, where I guide around here, yeah. I'm as a guide, I'm waiting for 3 people. And if I have a guy go slipping around, I have to have the safest thing on my feet so I can go grab him.
That's right.
And for me, that's felt. And when I'm on my rubber boat doing what I do around here, I'm going to wear my felt in my boat. And if I got to bail out to grab some guy by the back of the shirt, I'm going to do it in felt.
There you go. Well, a little bit about footwear there. Mm-hmm. So for sure. Now I know, and I'm going to open a Pandora's box here. We could do an entire 2-hour program just on flies for Taimen, but in just a minute or so, give me kind of your go-to thoughts on flies, must-have patterns, sizes, kind of some of the basics. And I know that's hard to do.
No, I get it. I'll use any skater as long as it's black.
Okay.
And then for streamer flies, I think you're just kind of your typical array of contrasting dark and light, chartreuse and white, blue and white, blue and gray. I'm not, flashtail whistlers are great, like a yellow and red flashtail whistler.
Skaters, big cyclops patterns.
As long as they're black.
As long as they're black.
Yeah.
All right. How about a hook size or a range of hook
2-aught,
sizes?
like that S10, something I use a lot of.
That 2-aught will cover most bases on most rivers.
Yep.
Yeah, these fish aren't afraid to eat when they decide they want something.
No, 1-aught, 2-aught, those are all pretty good. It's you got to be, time and guiding is math. It's just all simple math. How you cover the water. If you hear your fly tick behind you, please check it, because you don't know when you're going to get your next hit.
And it might be that 50-incher.
Yes.
The fish of the week.
Yes. Yeah. And it's just like, and the other cool thing, we were talking about how to contrast Taimen with other, types of fish. The thing that I really like about Taimen fishing is you really can move. Like if you take a pool that you might spend an hour in steelhead and you can fish it in 20 minutes, timing fishing. Because what you're doing is looking for the aggressive fish. There could be 8 fish in that pool, but one's in the mood. And unless
they're in the mood, they'll move.
They will move. And sight fishing's a different story. You don't always get to do it. So if you can work a fish and it'll let you work it, heck yeah, work it. But if you're just covering water, just go. Never be surprised by the puck, though. That's the thing. You get looking around, and all of a sudden the puck's on your stick, and you're in front of the net, and you can't. You got to be ready for a strike. It's hard, and you have to keep your tip down. And so my whole game as a guide is keeping people's chests towards their fly, keeping their hands in front of them so they can't do one of this. You don't work the fly with your rod tip. You work it with your hands, so your instinct isn't to lift. I just coach little disciplined things with the guys to hope that they convert better to their opportunities.
Because the opportunities might not come all that often, but when they do, they're going to
never know.
You just don't see it coming.
Don't expect it.
Well, that's so true. How about reading water when you're fishing for taimen? I mean, we already talked about the fact that there may be only 1 or 2 dozen fish per kilometer on some of these rivers. What are you looking for typically when you're hunting these fish? Is there certain things you're keying on when you're trying to read a run or a pool?
Yeah, definitely. So I think I would say that you would find your taimen water, it's a little bit of a split of variables, because they are big. So hydraulics are certainly important. Temp plays a role, but not so much because in the fall you're working kind of a more kind of cooler temp. I would suggest that you fish trout water about as much as anything. I feel like people get too stuck in the big kegs, like the big, dark, big pools where you could spend a lot of time fishing them, but you're fishing the living room, not the kitchen. So the kitchen where they're going to be looking for a snack, that's kind of the trout water. So the nice, walking pace water, the insides, that's the kind of water that I like to focus on.
I love it. The kitchen instead of the living room.
Yeah.
That's the first time I've heard you say that.
Yeah.
That's a great analogy right there.
Yeah. Fish farm in the kitchen.
So how about favorite water conditions for fishing for taimen? I mean, do you like, the high and off color early season? Do you like low clear water late season? When it rains or snows? I mean, what's kind of your thought on overall water conditions? Clear is better.
Yeah.
You're always hoping for clear. Obviously. Yeah. I mean, that's the same in Montana.
Yeah. The thing about it is, we've had opportunities to fish in the taimen season opens June 15th nationwide in Mongolia. And oftentimes, with few exceptions, there's no fishable water because the influence of the monsoon season and the high water and muddy water. But we've had the opportunity to fish in the spring before the rains come. Now, runoff isn't a huge issue there. They don't get a lot of snow, at least not in the regions where we fish. So the runoff kind of comes and goes real quick. So we've been in there in the spring where you're wet wading and it's warm. And I've noticed definitely that the fish move up more oxygen like we see on the Yellowstone, like trout fishing. When it's warmer, they're eating hoppers in 1.5 feet of water. So I've seen that kind of fishing with taimen, which is super exciting. But, you can't, because of the nature of the season, those were science permits that we had. And in the general season, it's going to be colder. You're going to be fishing colder water just because you need it clear. So
how about weather patterns? I mean, do you notice if you're over there and it's been nice for a week and all of a sudden, you get a freeze at night or it gets super cold for that first time? Does that turn things on, turn things off? What do you see?
Yeah. So it's funny because, for one thing, like trout, I like low light for one, maybe a little drizzle. So that's a big part of it. They'll eat better in low light. You get what I call severe clear. That's not good, which is beautiful, and it's good for photos. But the low light is better. You get this whole thing where you talk to taimen fishermen. They love that last bit of fishing before the freeze, like before it just goes to unfishable. And the fish get very active right before it shuts off. But to sell a fishing trip to be in those conditions really isn't reasonable. So leading up to that, you start getting freezes. And those initial freezes, I think, put them off a little bit for a bit. Once they kind of acclimate to it, it's pretty good. So any of those weeks in July are pretty good. You're going to have ups and downs, but if you get the right light and a little sleet or a little snow, those are good conditions.
It's good to know. So I'm going to throw another one at you here, Charlie. This is kind of a big general question, but overall, a couple key pieces of advice on how anglers can prepare for a Taimen trip, both mentally and physically. What are a couple key recommendations you have for preparation?
Well, leave your trout habits at home. You want to let them eat. You don't want to lift the rod and that's a tough question because you can't practice that. Usually when people leave Mongolia, they come back and go trout fishing, and they're bad trout fishermen once they get the timing figured out. But it's just probably the same things you hear when you do talks like this, Jim. Practice your casts and get used to your rods and reels. Talk to people. Talk to people who have been there. I guess the casting would be a big part of it. You're going to get it dialed in. I mean, you're going to go out and cast for a few days, and by day 3, you'll be feeling good about your setup, but you probably missed, half of your strikes for the week.
We talk about that all the time, whether it's a program on GTs or bonefish or trout, it doesn't matter, but it never ceases to amaze me, Charlie, that people will book a trip a year out. They'll spend a lot of money on the trip package and the flights and getting there. They'll take their valuable time off. And the first time they rig up their setup is their first day on the water with the guide,
sure,
without any kind of preparation or practice. And
right.
It's just amazing because, like you said, by day 3 or 4, sure, you're dialed in, but your trip is half over.
Sure.
And just a little bit of that practice and the casting and your presentations before you go will
But Jim,
deliver.
we need those guys working so they can take trips with us. So if it takes till day 3 till they're throwing it, well, I guess we'll just have to deal with it.
And just book a 2-week trip.
Book a 2-week trip. There you go. Just book a 2-week trip.
There we go. Well, let me ask you this. So we've mentioned UB, Ulaanbaatar, the capital of Mongolia, a couple of times. When you're passing through UB, and I get this question a lot from people headed over, what are a couple of your favorite things to do and see in the city? I know it's gotten hectic and crowded over there and chaotic, but do you have a couple of favorite things you like?
Well, I think you do the classic. You go to Sukbatar Square. You should go to Gondan Monastery in UB. Those are 2 you ought to do. One of the really cool, the History Museum.
Yeah. That's one of my favorites.
Not the Natural History Museum, which is cool, but the History Museum of Mongolia, which, by the way, they did a little deal at the Museum of the Rockies. I don't know if you went to that. It was great.
Yeah, last year they did
that History Museum is a great walkthrough with a guide, just to learn more about Mongolian culture. They have a room that's this long, narrow room with these glass cases. It's called the Del. So the Del is the traditional clothing of the Mongolians. And, pre-Genghis Khan, and of course it was past that as well because it's regional, but, before they're united, they're very tribal, and each tribe has their own set of clothing. And they have this room with all the different tribal wear, and that's a spectacular place to visit. So I wouldn't miss that.
I love that museum.
Yeah.
They also have, I think, the world's first RV. It's the
That's right.
yurt on
That's
wheels
right, yeah.
that maybe Genghis Khan had it, but it would be pulled by 100 animals and all kinds of things. It's a massive gur, which is like the big yurt on wheels, which is something to see.
Yep.
Pretty cool.
And for sure, in addition to practicing your casting, I'm going to get it wrong, but the Genghis Khan making of the modern civilization, or Genghis Khan and the modern civilization. So it's a book that, sort of talks about the time that the whole process of Genghis Khan, conquering the world in large part. That's a great read. And that's a great book to read leading up to a trip to Mongolia.
You're going right to the heart of it.
It's awesome.
Absolutely. Well, would you say that overall, in your opinion, all these years you spent over there, the Mongolians, wonderful people.
Wonderful.
Certainly some of the toughest people you've probably met anywhere.
Yeah, man. Totally.
That's a crazy environment. That
I haven't been there in the winter. I grew up in Minnesota, so I don't need to go to Mongolia. because I think it's worse. And, you know, oh man, tough. You know, those guys are breaking ice on the river so their animals can drink, and they cut hay in the fall and they put it up on their stables, and they have hay, and they burn dung to cook their food and to stay warm. And I mean, unbelievable.
Hardy people.
Hardy.
Yeah. How about the best glass of fermented mare's milk you've had over there? You a fan?
I think my first and my last must have been my best one.
That's some potent stuff.
Yeah, man.
Sure.
I mean, you know, people ask, I'm like, well, take a bridle and throw it in a blender and try to drink it. Or I don't know how to compare it. It's very horsey, you know.
Something you're not going to find at East Main Liquors here in Bozeman.
Man.
Fermented mare's milk.
Well, at least not inside it.
That's right. Well, this has been awesome, Charlie. Thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
You know, along with the actual time and trips that are offered on the Yellow Dog website, tell us where people can go to learn more about your work with the Taiman Fund and what you guys have going on.
Yeah, timeandfund.org.
Yeah.
You know, that kind of breaks down our programming. You know, we have educational programming and scientific, and then our kind of flagship Riverkeeper program.
Yeah.
And thank you for helping sponsor those through Yellow Dog the last few years. So that's a great deal.
Well, it's an amazing place.
Yeah.
And I've been fortunate enough to go over a few times now. And it's turned into one of my favorite destinations. It's a must-do trip for people that love adventure and new cultures and just completely off the grid type of fishing scenarios.
Well put.
It's amazing. Well, that's it for this episode of Waypoints, the podcast that is 100% dedicated to travel, adventure, and exploration. Be sure to visit yellowdogflyfishing.com to plan and research your next fishing trip, sign up for newsletters and new podcasts, and stay up to date on the latest travel news and developments. Join us for our next episode of Waypoints, and remember, no matter where you go or what you're doing, no one ever regretted a life of adventure.
This has been another episode of Waypoints, the podcast of fly fishing travel and adventure angling. Thank you for joining us, and be sure to visit yellowdogflyfishing.com for more trip updates, travel news, expert advice, and adventure profiles.